What's up guys, welcome back to the channel for another complete god guide. Today we're going to be covering another warrior, the illustrious sage Erlang Shen. So let's get right into the guide. So as always, let's start by going over the structure of the guide. We'll start by covering the basic playstyle of Erlang so you can get a feel if he's someone you'd like to learn. Then we'll move on to his abilities in depth, explaining how they work and how to use them most effectively. After that we'll come to build section, where I discuss and explain what items I use on Erlang to get the most out of him and then give a full build example. And finally we'll go over some general tips, synergies and stuff you need to look out for to make the most effective use of Erlang Shen that you can. Alright, so without further ado, let's get into the basic playstyle of Erlang Shen. Erlang, like most of the warriors, is best played as a tank, playing the front line and causing disruption among the enemy team while being hard to kill in the process due to high mobility, CC and sustain. Erlang does differ slightly from other warriors though, by being quite heavily focused on basic attacks within his kit that can allow him to fill a more damage oriented role for the team as well. He also has incredible CC within his kit that can lend itself well to being a supportive character. The culmination of these attributes leads to Erlang being at least somewhat viable in 3 different roles, those being solo, jungle and support. Alright, so now you know Erlang's basic playstyle, let's move on to covering his abilities in depth and the best ways to use them. So kicking it off with Erlang Shen's passive, the Howling Celestial Dog. This is a very simple passive, but it does have some ramifications with item builds and synergies later on. Erlang Shen's dog fights at his side on the battlefield. Whenever Erlang hits an enemy with a basic attack, his dog also hits for an additional 15% of the basic attack damage. So the most notable part of this passive outside the obvious bonus damage on autos is that it can proc certain item effects. For example, it will stack passives like Executioner or Ichabod twice on a single basic, and it will also trigger effects like Kin Size but only at 15% of their normal effectiveness. With passives that will proc but don't stack like Wind Demon or Frostbound Hammer, it will only proc once, but it does lead to a higher chance of proccing things like Wind Demon or Poison Star because the dog can also crit on top of your basic, so it's effectively double chance. I'm not necessarily recommending these items, they're just examples of how this passive can be applied in game. Also, rip Death Toll boys. Alright, so moving on to Erlang's 1, Spot Weakness. Erlang Shen activates his third eye and gains bonus damage on his auto attacks for 5 seconds on activation. While on cooldown, basic attack hits will reduce the cooldown of this ability by 1 second. This hits for 25 scaling up to 85 base damage and 15% scaling per hit and has a 14 second cooldown. So this is a very strange ability for a warrior to have, given that it's basically pure damage and 0 utility or sustain, but it works wonders because of synergies elsewhere in Erlang Shen's kit and builds. It's worth noting that this will also proc ability based item passives such as Gladiator Shield, Brawler's Beatstick, etc. Since it is counted as ability damage, but only once per target per cast. It won't keep proccing these items on every single auto you do, that'll be broken. Other than that, there's not much else to say about this ability really. Pop it when you feel you need the extra damage and then reduce the cooldown so you have it ready up as much as possible. It is worth noting though that it doesn't reset your attack chain, so you can do things like pop it right as you're about to hit the cleave auto attack and the 4th hit of his chain for some extra burst on minions or even on gods. But it also can't be used to AA cancel with abilities, so. Moving on, Erlang's 2, Pin, allows him to launch a projectile that explodes as it hits the ground, doing damage and rooting enemies in the centre of the circle for 1.3 seconds at all ranks, with a cooldown of 16 seconds. This is a very simple ability, but it's also really powerful. While it's not the root and cripple that it used to be, it's still an amazing engage tool as it's extremely long range and pretty easy to hit, which allows you to force someone's jump or dash or they risk dying to follow up CC and damage. Erlang's third ability, 72 Transformations, allows him to dash forward, assuming one of 2 forms, Turtle or Mink, which each have unique effects and uses. If he chooses Turtle, Erlang Shen will damage and knock up all enemies he passes through and also gain a health shield upon activation of 50 up to 215 health depending on the rank of the ability. If he chooses Mink form, Erlang Shen will pass through minions and stop at the first god hit, dealing more damage than Turtle form to any minions and gods he hits, and gaining a 15 up to 35% attack speed boost depending on rank. For both forms, he can cancel the ability early if he so chooses, and the ability has an 18 scaling down to 14 second cooldown depending on rank. So this ability is really where Erlang's kit gets spicy. These are really sort of defensive and offensive forms, with Turtle providing a shield and some great CC, and Mink providing no CC or utility but a lot of damage and some bonus attack speed that synergizes well with his 1 and his passive. Choosing the right form depending on the situation you're in is key to playing Erlang Shen well, and it will take some practice, but it's an incredibly powerful ability once you can master it. And this ability is really the crux of Erlang Shen's kit in my opinion. Once you know how to use this effectively, you'll play a much better Erlang. And finally, Erlang Shen's ultimate, 9 turns Blessing, allows him to taunt all nearby enemy gods in a cone in front of him, gaining damage mitigation for 4 seconds and a large burst heal after the 4 seconds is up. The taunt is only short at 1.2 seconds at all ranks, and the damage mitigation scales from 10% up to 15%, and the heal scales from 150 up to 450 plus 15% of your maximum health. This ability does feel a little strange to use at first, but once you get the hang of it, it can be extremely powerful. People often just look at the taunt and assume it's bad because the taunt is really short, like it's worse than Athena taunt basically if you only look at the taunt. But the heal and damage mitigation are huge for this ability, and they can allow for a ton of outplay potential, such as tower dives or baits, as well as just general sustain and CC in a fight. Alright, so let's talk a little bit about Erlang Shen's attack chain quickly. Usually I don't cover this as it's not that important, but Erlang's attack chain has some specific synergies and benefits that can be extremely important to know when playing him. His attack chain goes 0.75, 0.75, 0.75, 1.1, 0.9 damage and swing time. But the most important part is that the fourth hit, the 1.1 times damage, hits in an AoE cleave. This attack chain is great because most of the hits are fast but low damage. This allows Erlang to proc his passive and his 1 many times very quickly, which results in overall more damage output than if he had a slower but higher damage swing chain like Hercules for example. Plus there is of course the cleave hit on the 4th swing that allows Erlang Shen to clear waves and camps very quickly and also proc his 1-hand dog on multiple minions at once. So finally we'll cover leveling order before we move on to items and builds. So for level 1, in solo and support you should take 72 transformations for wave clear and poke. In jungle, take Spot Weakness because it's the fastest early jungle clear that you can get. Level 2 for solo and support you usually want to take Pin, but if you are in a boxing fight and you're hitting enemies a lot and fighting people and stuff, you might want to take Spot Weakness. For jungle, take 72 transformations. Level 3, no matter what role you're in, take the ability you don't have yet. Level 4, take a second point in 72 transformations, and level 5, take the ultimate. From there, prioritise leveling the 3, then the 1, then the 2, taking points in the ult whenever you can. For jungle, you can also not level the ult if you want to get more damage potential at the cost of some safety and level something like the 1 instead. Alright, so with his abilities out of the way, let's move on to what items Erlang Shen uses well and a couple full builds you can use. So this section is where it goes a little bit crazy. Since Erlang is viable in 3 different roles right now in my opinion, I'm going to cover the varying item builds for all 3 of those roles, being jungle, solo and support, all in this section. So we may cover them just a little bit quicker than normal in these guides, but I think it's going to be worth it so you'll know how to play him in 3 different roles. Alright, so kicking it off with starting builds in each role. For jungle, you'll want Assassin's Blessing for obvious reasons, then a tier 1 item and potions. The starting item could be mace, katana, tier 1 boots, etc, depending on what the meta is and what items you like to rush early. For solo lane, you'll need Warrior's Blessing for tankiness and sustain, then grab a tier 1 item and potions as before. Right now I highly recommend tier 1 boots and a Chalice of Healing to round out your build, to allow you to back early and rush full boots, but it's up to you really. And for support, Guardian's Blessing and then the same deal as before. Currently, Heavenly Wings upgrade is the best start for support, so I would recommend that, and then 6 potions or a Chalice of Healing. But other starts are viable depending on the meta after Heavenly Wings gets nerfed. So since there's tons of different builds depending on the role you're playing Erlang in, I'm going to cover his main 3 roles separately on what items you should be getting in each role. If you're only here for a specific role you want to play him in, here are some timestamps to jump to builds for each role. So kicking it off with jungle, your boots for jungle should basically always be Warrior Tabby. The 40 power is worth more than some attack speed from Ninja Tabby early on for Erlang Shen, and it also really boosts his early game power. After boots, jungle Erlang usually goes for quite a damage heavy build with a little bit of defense thrown in there as well. The Crusher is a great early rush item due to Erlang making great use of all the stats and the passive. Similarly, Stone Cutting Sword with the price decrease is a little bit more viable to rush early on as it gives great stats and Erlang double procs to passive due to his dog on each auto attack. So usually my second item after boots will be one of these 2. I usually lean towards Crusher, but Stone Cutting Sword can also be good. After that, there's a whole bunch of items you can make use of. Void Shield is really strong right now, giving penetration, damage and some defense that Erlang can definitely make use of. Anchile and Runic Shield are good counters to magical characters, which provide a hybrid of damage and defense. I prefer Anchile out of the 2, but both can be viable. Brawler's Beatstick is nice against very heavy lifesteal or healer comps. Masaminig is nice stats overall, with some movement speed and 50 power, plus a little bit of extra defense, which is very valuable on a warrior jungle such as Erlang Shen. Magi's Cloak is a great defensive pickup if hard CC is giving you trouble. Since Erlang Shen has no innate CC immunity in his kit, this can be useful to have. Wingblade is also really nice if you're against a lot of slows. It prevents them and then allows you to dive certain gods with that extra movement speed, such as Kukulkan or Anubis when they hit you with a slow. Spirit Robe or Mantle of Discord are nice mixed defense items. Specifically, Mantle is a nice way to round out a jungle build with some defensive stats and a life-saving passive if you get caught out, but Spirit Robe is viable as well. So literally as I was making this video, the 5.16 patch notes came out and introduced a new item, Berserker's Shield. This is basically the basic attack equivalent of Gladiator's Shield, and I think it's going to be really strong on Erlang. Here are the stats for those who haven't seen the patch notes yet. The stats are kind of meh, but pretty aggressive for jungle Erlang, which is nice, and the sustain works on camps, so I think it will be viable to rush on Erlang Shen jungle. Whether it's better than something like Crusher or Stone Cutting Sword is yet to be seen, but I'd definitely consider this item. And I'll quickly mention Executioner and Kin Size. While they do synergize quite well with Erlang's passive and his attack chain, these items are quite risky to get and use well. They work best when you're ahead and can stick to targets easily without dying to get the most out of them. If they're your style and you're ahead, then they can be good, but if you're behind, I'd stay away from these items and go into either defense or more ability damage items like the Crusher and Stonecutting Sword. So yeah, that would be my main item pool for Jungle Erlang. Obviously, other items can certainly be useful in certain niches, like Midgardian Mail against gods like Kali, or Pestilence against healers, stuff like that. Though it is better picked up on solos and supports usually. But in terms of a full build example for jungle, this should serve you pretty well in most games while you learn what items are good and you can sub in various items to fit your own playstyle. Start with Assassin's Blessing, Mace, 1 health and 1 multi-potion. Then get Warrior Tabby, finish your Mace into the Crusher. Then Stonecutting Sword, Void Shield, Magi's Cloak, Mantle of Discord. Selling your Blessing of course whenever you feel it's needed to finish an item. For relics in jungle, the usual 3 are what you want, bees and then either Blink or Aegis depending on your playstyle. Okay, moving on to solo in Erlang. Your boots for solo are the same as jungle, Warrior Tabby. Once again, the early power is too valuable to pass up on as it allows you to get faster clear and better poke early on. From there, your second item needs to be some defense against your lane opponent. If they're physical, I like Gladiator Shield, the new Berserker Shield will probably be good as well, and maybe Breastplate of Valor or Mystical Mail. If they're magical, Anchile, Genji's Guard and Pestilence are my go-tos. Pestilence if they're a healer, and Anchile being more aggressive and Genji's being more defensive. From there, you pretty much want to move into a typical warrior solo lane build. All the items I mentioned can be picked up later in the build as well, along with others like Hide of the Urchin, Spirit Robe, Mantle of Discord, Wingblade, Midgardian Mail, Witchblade, Masamune, and even Stonecutting Sword can be decent if you're ahead and want to play aggressive. Just pick from these items for what you need in the current game. If you're having trouble getting slowed, pick up a Wingblade. If you want some more damage, pick up a Masamune. If you're having trouble with auto attack characters, pick up Midgardian Mail, etc, etc. But those are my usual item choices. Here's a full build example for those who don't care about that. Start with Warrior's Blessing, Tier 1 boots and a Chalice of Healing. Finish your boots into Warrior Tabby, then Gladiator Shield or Berserker Shield, depending on which one is the best. I think Berserker Shield's probably going to be better, but if it turns out to be crap, then you can get Gladiator Shield. Or Genji's Guard if they're a magical lane opponent. Then get the other one in slot 3 that you didn't get. Then Spirit Robe, Midgardian Mail, and Mantle of Discord. And you can sell the shield you got in your second or third slot for a better item late game if you feel you need it. As always, feel free to swap out certain items for others and try some stuff out to find the build that works best for you. Good relics for solo include Teleport, Shell, Heavenly Wings, Blink, and Horrific Emblem. Any 2 of these will usually be fine. And finally, support Erlang Shen. Your boots for support will usually want to be Talaria boots for the extra movement and rotation potential, but if you really want to get aggressive, you could also take Warrior Tabby. Then you usually want an aura-based build, aka Gauntlet of Thebes, Sovereignty, and maybe Heart Ward depending on the enemy team comp. Spirit Robe and Mantle of Discord are as usual really nice for personal defense against CC and being bursted. Midgardian Mail is great against heavy basic attack comps, Pestilence against healers, Wingblade against a lot of slows, Shogun's Kasari if your team uses a lot of basic attacks, and Emperor's Armor is nice for sieging phoenixes or also defending them. So here's a full build example for a typical support build. Start with Guardian's Blessing, upgraded Heavenly Wings, 4 health and 2 mana potions. Then get Talaria boots, Gauntlet of Thebes, Sovereignty, Heart Ward Amulet, Midgardian Mail, Mantle of Discord. In terms of support relics, they're similar to solo, with Sprint and Shell being the best 2 in my opinion, but you can also grab Curse, Horrific Emblem, or even Blink if you're feeling it. And as always, experiment with other items to try and find a build that works best for you. Alright, sorry if I went into a little less detail than I normally do with the build section. Since there's basically 3 times as much stuff to cover since it's viable in 3 different roles, I tried to keep it to a reasonable length. If you still have any questions about items and such for the various roles, then drop them in the comments and I'll try and get back to you. But anyway, with builds out of the way, let's move on to some general tips, synergies, and things to look out for when playing Erlang. So when you're playing Erlang, you might think dashing in with a turtle is a great way to engage, but usually that's not the case. It's slow, and most of the time you're better engaging with pin or using blink taunt or something like that. You're usually better going for the knockup when you're sure you can land it, which is usually up close in melee range almost, where you can quickly cast and cancel the ability to get the shield and knockup and continue to use autos and other abilities to bring them down. Also, if you engage with a knockup, it DRs your root and your taunt, which really isn't ideal, whereas if the knockup is the last CC you use in your rotation of cooldowns, the DR doesn't affect you as much, because obviously DR doesn't affect knockups. Also, I see a lot of people who really overrate the Mink form. It's definitely not bad, especially in jungle when you need the damage, but in boxing fights in solo or fights in duo, you're usually better off going with the turtle. The knockup and shield are worth more in terms of sustain and CC as opposed to a little bit of extra damage and attack speed that the Mink gives you. The shield lasts 12 seconds, which is honestly ridiculous and means you almost always get value from it, so I think it's probably good even if it just tanks up a little bit of minion damage. I see loads of Erlang players constantly using the 3 trying to engage with it and I just facepalm. Usually the 3 is only better if you're in a 1v1 or need to chase a kill with the haste and attack speed. In a teamfight, the shield and CC are worth more most of the time. From jungle there is some merit to using the Mink more, because the attack speed is worth more when you're building more damage. but from solo and support, the turtle should usually be your priority. Also, it's pretty obvious to anyone who's played Erlang for a little bit, but the heal on the ult is incredibly delayed, so don't expect to like out-heal and execute with it or something like that. It's better just to get the taunt off earlier in a fight rather than later, and use it as like an engage or a counter engage or a follow-up, rather than saving it to confirm a kill. This allows you to get the heal off more reliably and have less of those awkward moments when you die just before the heal comes through. On the topic though, Erlang's ult is really good for tower diving. It gives a bit of CC to keep enemies in range of your damage, which is nice, but the main part is the damage mitigation and healing. This allows you to take less damage from the dive and also get a big burst heal to survive and get out afterwards. Just make sure you time the heal right, of course, and don't die to the tower. But that's about it for me on this guide, guys. This one might have been a little long, but I really wanted to cover everything I could, including all 3 roles Erlang can be viable in, rather than just covering one. Leave a like if you learned something, and share the video with anyone else you think could benefit from it. These guides take a long time to make, so any support is greatly appreciated. But that's about it. I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace.